being able to be the machine and predict what a piece of code is going to be able to do by executing each of the instructions is a really important skill. There are, however, other ways that we can figure out what a piece of code is doing. In this video, we'll look at how a debugger can help us see the exact effect that a piece of code is going to have.
So just to clarify, Eclipse is the tool that we use to write the code. The debugger is one part of Eclipse, and the purpose of the debugger is to run the code and be able to stop it at any point that we want to stop it and look and see what is happening in the memory at that moment. This is a great way to try to figure out what a piece of code does.
When you open up Eclipse, it will ask you for a folder for your workspace. Just create an empty folder, and when you say OK, you'll get to a screen that looks like this. This is giving you a lot of examples of things that you could do in Eclipse. We don't care, so we're just going to close that. And it's going to give you the default workspace. What I want to do is I want to create a new Java project. Every time you want to do something, it has to be in a Java project. And I'm just going to call this Play with Loops. Default everything else. When it asks if you want to create module info, just tell it don't create that because we don't need that. Now it'll give me a folder over here in the Package Explorer with nothing in it. In order to write any code at all, I need to create a new class. I'm going to call it Silly Loop. And I'm going to say I want it to have a main method because I want to be able to run it. So that's just going to make Eclipse write the framework for us to put our code in. And the curly brackets are in the wrong places. Let me show you quickly how to fix that. If I go to Project, Properties, Compiler, no, Code Style, Formatter, configure the workspace settings so it'll be remembered for everybody. Create a new profile, and it doesn't matter what you name it because we're only going to have this one. And edit it. And the curly brackets, the brace positions, you want every one of them to be next line. Okay. Now, anytime I have written some code and I want to make it be formatted correctly, I can do Control A to select it all and then say Source Format. And it'll put all the curly brackets and indentation where it ought to be. Okay, so now we have our class, and we know that main is where we put the stuff that we want to run. So I am just going to put the same code that we played with in the last lab, or the last video. You'll notice every now and then there will be red squiggles. That is the compiler is running all of the time, and it's telling you that your code is not formatted correctly there. You can mouse over the red thing and it will tell you what's wrong, and this is saying I'm missing the semicolon. And it's right. I'm missing the semicolon at the end of that line. At the end of the line. Sometimes those red squiggles will be laying around and you can't figure out what's wrong. One thing to look at is if there's an asterisk up here, that means you haven't saved the file. You can use Control S to save, and that will force the compiler to run one more time. So sometimes that's the way to get rid of the squiggly lines because the compiler is just confused and needs to run from scratch. So I have my code here, And the first thing I'm going to do is run it just to make sure that we get the output that we saw in the last thing. And there is the output exactly the way we predicted it. So when we did our be the machine, the output that we got is exactly the output that happens when we run it. But Eclipse is a much more powerful tool than that. It can be a great way to figure out what's happening with your code or to watch something to learn about how a particular piece of code works. If I click, why is it not doing it?
Psst, Merlin. Sometimes the code doesn't really have any executable code on it. You can't put a breakpoint on a declaration. Just pick a line that will execute.
If I double click on a line, there we go. Sets a breakpoint. That little blue circle is a breakpoint. And what that says is when we run it with the debugger, we want the computer to run it until we get to that point, and then we want it to stop and show us what the state of memory is at that moment. So I can say debug as Java application. When I did it a minute ago, I said run as. But now I want to debug as Java application. It's going to ask me, can I go to the debug perspective? In Eclipse, a perspective is the arrangement of the frames on the screen. And when we're debugging, we want to see different things. So yes, I want to switch. And I'm going to say, remember my decision, because I always wanted to do that. Switch. So you can see it kind of redraws itself. We have over here, it shows what's running. And down here is the output, the console where things will be output. And over here on the right, we'll be able to see our variables. When the line that is highlighted is the line that it stopped at, and it is about to execute that instruction. It has not yet executed that instruction. But I can use this button up here to step over. And what that tells the computer is that I want you to run exactly one instruction. Just do this one and then stop again. So if I say step over, it'll do count gets the value 0 and stop. And if I look over here in my variables, there's count, and it has a value of 0. It's going to compare. So now we're sitting on this while statement. This while statement is going to compare is count less than 4, and that's going to be true. So when I step over, it's going to go into the loop. It's going to print out the 0. It's going to increment count, and you'll see count gets highlighted up here because its value was changed to be 1, and then it's going to print out high and go back to the top of the loop. It's going to compare the 1 to the 4. 1 is less than 4. It's going to print out the value that's in count, which is 1. It's going to increment count, which is now 2. It's going to print out high and go back to the top of the loop. 2, the value in count is 2. That's still less than 4. Print it out, increment it, print out high, go to the top. Is count less than 4? Yes, it is. So it does it again. Print out the 3, increment count, print out high, goes back to the top. When it compares now, is count less than 4? Count has a 4 in it, so it is not less than 4. So the loop is finished. So when I say step over, it's going to go to the next instruction after the loop. It's going to print out done. And now we're finished. And you can tell that it's finished because it says terminated right there.
For now, while we're learning to read code, we're going to use the debugger to watch how code works. That's part of how we'll learn to be the machine. But soon, when you start writing your own code, it won't always work the way you think it's going to work. And when something feels broken, the debugger can be like a magic wand to help you figure out what's wrong in your code.